Despite the fact that the North Sphere of Sector 6 were severely low on resources, they didn't hesitate in providing a drifter for them to use. It was hard to find a good air current carrying them all the way to Sector 8, so they settled for another trip on the sea. "Are you sure we could just take this and go?" Blake asked uncertainly, a sheepish look in his eyes. "I mean, to you, this whole thing is none of your concern at all, and we're just a waste of resources. You met us just today, and the only people this will affect is probably me, Arda, and maybe the rest of Sector 8. The rest of the world doesn't even know." "Blake," Kukino cut him off swiftly. "Do you know how many people have survived a full-on attack from a school of tuna fish?" Blake looked stunned. So did Arda, which in turn stunned Blake even more. Was seeing an open expression on his face really that jarring? "I don't follow." Kokino gave a bittersweet smile, closing her eyes and shaking her head as some Sector 6 members prepared to drift her. "Two, Blake. Two. And that's you and Arda." That... Arda was surprised. No one except them had survived a full-on tuna attack? Why? Then how did they, or more specifically Blake, survive when they had no experience in the water? Actually, Arda had a suspicion why. Blake had been there after all, and if the fact that he seemed to recognize Cleona was any indication, then he was much more different from the rest of the humans on Zeta than even Arda had realized. "We were lucky you were around," Blake pointed out. "I wouldn't have survived if you didn't use the wave call, and Arda is a supercomputer doubled as an indestructible living being." "You're downplaying yourself," Arda said sharply, but not rudely. "And you know it. You're downplaying and holding yourself back. Stop that." Blake frowned. No, Arda, I'm not. I couldn't have survived for long if you weren't there. And you would have found a way to escape to the building as well had I not been there. You would have survived, Blake. Admit it. The only reason you had trouble is because you always hold yourself back." He did not admit it. He exhaled and looked away, climbing into the drifter, which shimmered like a blurry patch of the ocean due to its natural camouflage, and could easily be mistaken for a trick of the light from afar. Arda stared at the drifter, frowning. He sighed, looking back at Kokino. Thank you, truly, for saving him and for providing the drifter. But you never answered Blake's question. Why are you willing to just give us a drifter for means that probably wouldn't concern you?" An earthquake shook the city and the road they were walking on. Something in the distance, perhaps the breeze from a broken-down building, slammed into the water loudly, the sound echoing all the way to them. Kokino sighed. Her shoulders drooped, seemingly carrying an invisible weight that she'd been trying to hide, but couldn't in the end. Her face was calm, however. Not peaceful or reluctant, just calm. "Well, you're not wrong that we're low on resources. This is one of our 3 drifters that we have to spare, and we're using up more medical supplies than any other sector. 2 out of 5 supply imports ever make it to our harbor, and we're losing on average 6 members every month due to starvation, seagull and tuna attacks, drowning, disease, and malnutrition. Just yesterday, my sister committed suicide when she suffered a miscarriage after 6 months of pregnancy, the week before." Arda stared at her. He didn't know how to respond to that. It shouldn't be surprising. Pregnancy was hard enough on Earth without an apocalypse, but now, on Zeta, the added stress of low supplies, constant deaths, an apocalypse and a conflict between nations going on outside, plus the terrible weight of not being able to do anything because she was carrying the future of Sector 6, was harsh to say the least. To see people die around her and think that her baby was being born into such an unstable world would only make her mindset worse. Having a miscarriage 6 months into pregnancy and dashing the hopes of so many people, Kukino was strangely cool about the fact. She did show signs of being nervous of her grief, however. She crossed her arms as an instinctual move and tapped her fingers against her arm. she was just really good at hiding it. Like Blake. Anyways, the fact that you and Blake survived the tuna attack itself was half the reason I allowed you the drifter. Arda could understand. Confidence, self-esteem. Arda and Blake had basically single-handedly renewed Sector 6 determination. And the other reason is that I'm a strong believer of cooperation between the Imperialists and the North Spheres, Kukino said. She glanced at the other Sector 6 members, who were all talking amongst one another as they waited for their colonel. Actually, most members here are. Daniel over there isn't, but he doesn't really care either way. And when he talked about having a truce, a peaceful agreement with the 31st Platoon, that might have sparked something. The corners of her mouth twitched in an almost smile. So, I'm actually grateful, truly. Arda bowed his head slightly. Thank you, Colonel Kukino. Kukino clapped him on the back, which was by far the most friendly gesture he'd seen her make. Now, get on the drifter and go. It seems, whatever the situation is, it's pretty important, huh? You don't say. Since when did you know how to navigate a drifter? Arda asked, his eyes narrowed. Blake did his best to avoid eye contact by staring at the screens before him, hands flying across the dashboard and controls, expertly maneuvering the drifter out of Lucinto. It cut cleanly across the waves as they pulled out into the open ocean, but never straying far from the coast. He turned the nose north and started zipping through the water, the coastline rising subtly as it turned into cliffs. Since, she taught me. Years ago. Arda had a suspicion as to who. Cleona Kendall? How do you know her, Blake? Though Blake avoided looking at him, he knew he was nervous from his posture and his fidgety habits. He swallowed. Would you mind if we talk about this later? There was a brief moment of silence. Blake sat down in the captain's seat, bounced his leg, staring straight ahead. One hand was still on the joystick that served as a simple control of the drifter, even though the drifter was capable of driving itself. A wave crashed into them, but Blake pushed on the joystick and they somehow ended up riding on top of the wall of water. His movements were smooth, relaxed, like it was easy, but from what could be seen of his facial expressions, he was the opposite. Blake's jaw was clenched in a way that couldn't be good for his teeth. His eyes slightly widened, shoulders tense, and he was breathing small, quick breaths. Arda sat in the co-pilot seat and sighed. He glanced over at Blake, arms crossed, a slight frown on his face. He wasn't sure what to say, if he wanted to say anything at all. There was a strange feeling in his chest. He couldn't quite identify it, but at the same time, he knew what they were instinctively. Like they were hardwired into his brain, even though he'd never felt anything like it before. Worry, anticipation, weariness, nervousness. He knew it was a byproduct of his developing personality, the existence of which he couldn't deny anymore. It was so odd to have opinions and preferences, and have emotions created out of that. He wasn't sure what to feel about those feelings. It was foreign. It was odd. He didn't not like it. He just felt sad whenever he thought about his personality, because Blake had been the main contributor. And Arda could not figure out why, but that made him feel incredibly weird. You are human. Leaning against the chair, Arda adjusted the seat so it rolled back, and he propped his boots up on a clear spot of the dashboard. It just felt like an incredibly satisfying and relaxing position. He closed his eyes as he laid there, trying to get his muscles to rest. Sleep wasn't something he needed, but at that moment, it felt tantalizing. There were so many things to think about, so many questions to ask. However, it was no use if they didn't even have the full story, or all the information. And they could only get that from Kendall Square, which was still a few days away. For now, both of them needed some time just resting. overexerting was of no benefit to anyone. Even without sight, he could feel Blake's eyes on him. He couldn't feel the emotion behind it, but it was warm and soft. "Wake me in 4 hours," Arda said, feeling his mind drifting off. "We'll alternate piloting shifts." Blake let out a soft laugh. "All right. Good night, Arda." 5 days later, they entered the same basement from which they left their previous drifter. Blake's expertise in piloting the drifter got them to Sector 8 a day earlier than Kultice had, up the underground river, and parked the drifter in the dark basement, lit by the vehicle's lights. They took flashlights and ascended up the staircase in their usual clothing for cold weather. Blake shivered as they emerged in the field of snow that covered North Cove. They had to push aside the snow that gathered by the entrance over the past 11 days to climb out, and by the time they made it to the surface entirely, beginning their trek back towards the thin, dark line of the forest several kilometers ahead, the day fading into night, they were sweating rather than shivering. "That was one way to warm up," Blake said, panting and breathless. Unlike the situation a week and a half ago, they knew where they were headed. They had a destination in mind, so it took them less than half a day to reach the woods, where they took a short break for Blake to rest. Arda, unexpectedly, felt a little exhausted by then as well. Even if he didn't need food, water, rest, or any basic needs humans needed, he felt as if it was simply wrong not to need them. In fact, the feeling was so off and so wrong that after a few minutes of tapping his foot on the snow as he kept a lookout towards Kultice, he finally sighed and walked over to plop down beside Blake. He nearly choked on his turkey as he jumped in surprise. "Arda, what?" "I'm just resting," Arda grumbled, staring balefully out towards the city. Nothing surprising, no need for excitement and enthusiasm. Arda could feel Blake's stupid, giant, triumphant grin, and his eyes staring at his head smugly. "Oh ho ho." Blake scooted closer to sling an arm around Arda's shoulders, making him tense at the unexpected impact. "Really? Nothing surprising. The great Arda Zephany, with the mind of a quantum computer and literally the smartest person in the whole universe, who was previously thought to be a robot, is showing that you need rest?" There was pure, unrestrained glee in his voice. "Oh, for the love of..." Alright, sure. Blake owned most of the credit for Arda displaying such human-like behaviors, but really? Really? Arda crossed his arms. "Shut up." Not anytime soon, Mr. Not Celeste. I feel like I just accomplished a life goal. You're actually expressing emotions, and that is an achievement deserving of an award. What low standards for a life goal. Just because I am expressing emotions does not change the fact that your jerky is going to freeze if you don't eat it soon. Wait, what? No! Not my jerky! How can you, Arda? I thought helping you develop a personality would at least give you a heart. I have a heart. It's a muscle organ that pumps blood through my veins and keeps me alive. I did not gain it from developing my personality. You know what Blake facepalmed, but he was grinning. Okay, alright, I see now. Your personality is just 90% sass and 10% heartless. I get it now. It doesn't change the fact that you still have one now. To his immense disappointment, Arda could not object to that. Though he did not feel different or like someone else, he did feel changed in a way. Like some piece of him had been missing all along, which he hadn't even noticed, was being slotted into place. He could sometimes think more clearly, and he felt like he was in control. And though he had been in control of his fate for the most part in the past few weeks, it was still foreign to him. Still something he was not used to. Still like a loose-fitting shirt, and he wasn't sure if it was even meant for him at all. When he'd saved Saguang and Tinkan, for example, he'd had to make a choice. He'd had to take control of the situation with his own hands, something he had never done in what he was now sure was millions of years. Millions of years, drifting in space. It had become a habit after such a long time. Even when he didn't have a personality, it became a habit, just like his habit of spewing out facts and corrections. And a million-year-old habit was not easily broken in just a month.